Welcome to the Science of Hockey, the podcast where we break down the science behind ice hockey. I'm the analyst, your host, and every week we explore the data, research, and evidence that shape how we play, train, and understand the game of hockey. From biomechanics to performance psychology, we take you beyond the rink and into the research lab, giving you insights that go beyond hearsay and into what really makes the difference on the ice. Whether you're a player, a coach, a parent, or just someone passionate about the sport, we're here to bring you scientifically backed information in a language that's friendly and easy to understand. So grab your skates and let's dive into the science of hockey. Hello, hockey fans. This is the Science of Hockey, and I'm your host, the analyst. In this episode, we analyze injuries across the spectrum of ice hockey, from minor league risks to the intense demands of professional play. Join us for a closer look at what it takes to keep players safe.
All right, let's get ready for a deep dive into the world of ice hockey injuries. It's something I know you're really interested in learning more about.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're going to go deep. We're going to look at all levels of play, from youth leagues all the way up to the pros. See how those injury trends change and what people are doing to try to protect these players.
And it's interesting, we're not just looking at the injuries themselves, but how those injury patterns shift as players get older and the game kind of changes.
Yeah, I mean, you would think with more experience you would be less prone to injuries.
No.
But it sounds like maybe that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we're going to find out.
So, okay, let's start with a little scene setting here. I mean, we all know that hockey is a fast-paced physical sport.
For sure.
But just how dangerous can it get out there on the ice?
Well, you've got players skating at like 30 miles per hour on these thin blades. Pucks are flying around at over 100 miles an hour. And then you add in the collisions, the body checks, and in some leagues you even have fights. It's a sport where injuries are definitely a risk. And as players get bigger, stronger, the game speeds up, those risks definitely increase.
I'm starting to see why maybe the experience doesn't always lead to fewer injuries.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's break this down by level of play. Starting with the youngest players, what kinds of injuries are we seeing in like youth and high school hockey?
So at that level, the most common injuries are going to be your contusions, fractures, sprains, and strains. Lacerations, too.
Oh, wow.
And these tend to happen most often to the head, neck, and upper extremities. You know, think about it. These are younger players. They're still developing coordination, strength, so they're a bit more susceptible to those types of injuries, especially as they're kind of navigating the physicality of the sport for the first time.
Right. Makes sense. Now, there's a lot of debate out there about body checking in youth leagues. Some people argue that it's a core part of the game. Others say it's too dangerous for young players. What does the research actually say on that?
It's a hot topic for sure, and there's been some interesting research. One study actually found a 33% reduction in injuries when body checking was delayed until age 13.
Oh, wow.
So allowing those younger players to develop, better balance, control before they start really hitting each other full on, that can really reduce those awkward collisions and those injuries that come with them.
33% is a pretty big difference. That seems like pretty strong evidence to support delaying it.
Well,
So moving up to junior hockey,
yeah.
where these players are, getting more physically mature
Yeah.
and the competition is starting to ramp up, how do those injury patterns shift?
Well, at that level, the overall injury rate goes up. We start to see more concussions, facial lacerations, the speed and the force of the game, it really intensifies, and players are pushing their limits, trying to get noticed to advance.
Yeah, so those bigger hits are definitely taking a toll. What about facial protection at that level? Are players required to wear full cages?
It varies, it depends on the league, but studies have shown how effective that facial protection can be. There was a study on junior A hockey players. They often wore visors, but not full cages. And they found that those without any facial protection had more than double the rate of facial injuries compared to those with the partial protection, and the ones wearing full cages. Their facial injury rate was almost 7 times lower.
Wow, that's amazing. It seems like a pretty clear argument for full face protection. All right, let's talk about college hockey. What kinds of injuries are we seeing at that level?
College hockey is an interesting one. They actually have some of the highest game injury rates, but really low practice injury rates.
Really?
Yeah, so it seems like it's the intensity of the competition during those games that really takes a toll. There's some debate over which injury type is the most common. Some studies point to knee injuries, others to concussions as the biggest concern.
So yeah, those college games are no joke. And then, of course, we get to the professional level, where you've got, players at their peak physical abilities. Stakes are incredibly high. what's happening in terms of injuries at that level?
Well, as you might expect, professional hockey has the highest injury rates overall. We see a lot of lacerations, especially to the head and neck, probably because, most professional players in North America wear visors, not full cages. You also see a lot of ligament sprains, especially knee injuries, contusions, fractures, and of course concussions are always a concern.
It's really interesting how the types and the severity of these injuries seem to kind of track as you go up in the ranks. But one thing that does seem consistent across all levels is that the risk of injury is higher during games than practices.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, during a game, the adrenaline's pumping. The players are competing hard, pushing their limits, and that can lead to some riskier plays, more intense contact, and unfortunately, more injuries. Practices are more controlled. Players can focus on skill development without that same kind of pressure.
That makes sense. Now we can't really talk about hockey injuries without acknowledging the difference between men's and women's hockey. It's well known that body checking is not allowed in the women's game. So how does that rule difference actually affect those injury rates?
It's a huge difference. You see way fewer injuries in women's hockey compared to men's at every level. It really shows you the impact that one rule change can have on player safety.
Wow. Okay, well, we've talked about the types of injuries across different levels of hockey, but let's shift gears a bit and talk about prevention. What are people doing to try to protect these players and minimize those risks?
Yeah, we're going to get into that a lot more, but I think it's important to say that there's a lot of good work being done on that front. There's this growing understanding that we need to protect these players, and we're seeing some interesting new innovations popping up all the time.
I'm definitely excited to hear more about that. Let's start with something we touched on earlier, facial protection. The evidence seems pretty clear. Full facial protection can really make a difference.
Oh, absolutely. Remember that study we talked about with the junior A players?
Yeah.
The players with those full cages? They had way fewer facial and eye injuries compared to those with no protection or just visors.
So yeah, it seems like a pretty good idea. What about other initiatives? Are there other things that are being done to try to prevent specific types of injuries?
Well, one program that's gaining a lot of traction is USA Hockey's Heads Up, Don't Duck initiative. It's all about reducing those cervical spine injuries, which can be really scary.
I've heard of that program. It sounds really important. So how does it actually work?
Basically, they're teaching players how to position their bodies, how to make contact without leading with their heads.
Oh, okay.
So instead of ducking their heads when they're going into the boards or making contact, they're learning to keep their heads up and absorb that impact in a safer way.
That makes a lot of sense. Hopefully those head-first collisions are going to go down. Are there specific programs out there, training programs even, that are focused on preventing concussions? I mean, that's been a huge area of concern in hockey.
Yeah, absolutely. Concussions are a top priority. And there's a whole multi-pronged approach to prevention. One key area is teaching players proper body checking techniques, especially during practices.
Right.
So it's not just about, getting rid of body checking altogether, but making sure that when they are doing it, it's being done safely and in a controlled way.
So they can reduce the risk of those accidental blows to the head.
Exactly.
And I know there's been talk about delaying the introduction of body checking, especially at those younger levels.
That's right. The idea being to let those younger players develop those skating skills and puck handling skills before they start with the full contact. So they're more in control of their bodies and less likely to get into those dangerous situations.
So it's all about laying that foundation of good technique and control before you add in the extra layer of physicality. Now, what about rule changes? Are leagues looking at stricter penalties for head hits and other dangerous plays?
Definitely. A lot of leagues have already implemented stricter penalties for those head hits. And there's a growing movement to penalize any contact to the head, regardless of intent. The message is clear: we need to protect players' brains. And hitting someone in the head is just unacceptable.
It's a big shift, moving away from that old tough it out mentality and really acknowledging the seriousness of these head injuries.
It's a crucial shift.
Yeah.
And along with those rule changes, there's also a lot of research being done into helmet technology.
Yeah, helmets are that first line of defense against those head injuries. What are some of the latest advancements there?
So traditionally, helmets were mainly designed to protect against skull fractures. Now the focus is shifting to mitigating concussions. Those injuries that happen when the brain moves rapidly inside the skull.
Right, yeah. So how are they changing the helmet designs to address that?
They're using new materials and designs that are better at absorbing and dissipating those impact forces, especially those rotational forces that can cause concussions. There's even a scientific rating system now to evaluate how effective different helmets are at reducing concussion risk.
Wait, a rating system for helmets?
Yeah, it's a cool development.
Tell me more.
It takes into account how well a helmet reduces those linear and rotational accelerations to the brain during an impact. It helps people make more informed decisions about which helmets offer the best protection. And it pushes manufacturers to keep innovating, make helmets even safer.
Wow, that sounds like a big step forward. So we've talked about teaching those safe techniques, delaying body checking, stricter rules, and better helmets. What other areas are they looking at for future safety improvements?
Well, one area that's really exciting is energy-absorbing boards and glass. So imagine the boards surrounding the rink could actually help absorb some of that impact energy during those big hits.
So instead of a player's body taking the full force of that impact, it's like a cushion around the rink.
Exactly. And it's not just the boards, they're even redesigning the glass. So instead of shattering on impact, the newer versions flex inward, absorb some of that energy.
That's amazing. Are there any studies showing how effective this new stuff is?
There are some studies going on, and the early results look really promising. It looks like those energy-absorbing systems can really reduce the force that's transmitted to a player's body, which could mean a lot fewer concussions and other injuries.
That is incredible. It really feels like technology is playing such a huge role in all this.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the equipment, right? There's got to be a focus on training and technique, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, we're seeing a lot of progress in developing programs and techniques that focus on improving a player's balance, their coordination, their body control.
So they can hopefully avoid those awkward falls and collisions that can lead to injuries.
Exactly. It's about giving those players the tools they need to navigate the physical demands of this sport in a safe and controlled way, like teaching them how to properly brace for impact, how to fall safely. These things can make a big difference.
Yeah, those skills could be really valuable in all aspects of the game, not just in preventing those injuries.
Absolutely. Better balance, coordination, body control. It's going to translate into better performance overall.
All right, let's circle back to a topic we talked about a little bit earlier, the Heads Up, Don't Duck initiative. We talked about how it teaches players to avoid leading with their heads, but can you elaborate on how that program actually works?
Sure. It goes beyond just telling players to keep their heads up. They use drills and exercises to teach players how to maintain proper body positioning throughout the game, like how to anticipate contact, how to brace for impact, how to absorb hits without putting their head and neck at risk.
So it's about instilling those good habits early on.
Exactly. And it seems to be working. Studies have actually shown a pretty significant reduction in those cervical spine injuries since the program started.
That's good to hear. And speaking of concussions, there's so much research being done to find better ways to detect and manage those injuries. So what are some of the latest developments in that area?
One area that's really exciting is the use of sensors and wearable technology to monitor player impacts and movements in real time. So imagine a player takes a hard hit. Sensors in their equipment can instantly alert the medical staff to how hard that hit was and where it happened.
That sounds kind of futuristic.
It does, doesn't it?
Like something out of a movie.
But it's becoming a reality.
Wow.
These sensors can measure things like linear and rotational acceleration, which are key factors in concussions. And by collecting that data right away, medical staff can make better decisions about whether a player needs to be evaluated for a possible concussion.
So instead of relying on players to report their own symptoms,
Yeah.
which we know they don't always do accurately, you have this objective data.
Exactly.
Wow. And this technology can go beyond just concussion detection too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It can be used to identify those dangerous patterns of movement. Risky playing styles that might make someone more susceptible to injury.
So coaches could use this information to provide feedback to players, help them improve their technique.
Wow. It's about using technology not only to react to injuries, but to prevent them from happening in the first place.
This is all really fascinating, and it seems like there's a real commitment across all levels of hockey to make safety a priority.
Yeah.
But there's also the question of the culture of hockey and how that's changing. We talked about moving away from that tough it out mentality, but what other cultural shifts are you seeing?
Well, there's a much bigger emphasis on the mental and emotional well-being of these players now. For a long time, those aspects were kind of overlooked, especially in a sport like hockey where toughness is so valued.
So are we seeing a more open and accepting approach to mental health issues?
Definitely.
Yeah.
There's this growing recognition that mental health is just as important as physical health. and players need to feel comfortable getting help when they need it.
That's so important, especially when we're talking about concussions. We often focus on those physical symptoms, but those mental and emotional impacts can be just as significant.
Absolutely. Concussions can cause all sorts of problems. Difficulty concentrating, memory problems, anxiety, depression, and those can stick around long after the physical stuff has cleared up.
So it's crucial for parents, coaches, medical professionals to be aware of that and create a supportive environment where players feel comfortable speaking up.
Exactly. We need to move away from that culture of just sucking it up to one where players feel empowered to prioritize their own health and well-being,
Right.
both mentally and physically.
Yeah, and that's a big shift, changing that mindset in hockey,
It is.
which can be a challenge, but it seems like we're moving in the right direction.
I think so. There's still a lot of work to do, but the progress is definitely encouraging.
Well, this has been an incredible start to our deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from how those injuries change across those different levels of play to the multifaceted approach to prevention.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in. So we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, we're going to keep digging into those prevention strategies and explore the potential impact they could have on the future of this sport. So join us in part 2 of this deep dive. We'll see you there.
Welcome back to our deep dive on hockey injuries.
Now, picking up where we left off, I'm really curious to hear more about these future innovations in hockey safety. You mentioned energy-absorbing boards and glass. So how exactly do those work?
Well, the boards we have now are pretty rigid. So when a player hits them, most of that force is going right into their body. These new designs use materials that are more flexible. They have a little more give.
So it's almost like having a big cushion around the whole rink.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it's not just the boards. They're even redesigning the glass. Instead of shattering, the new glass will flex inward and absorb some of that energy.
Wow, that could really make a big difference. Are there studies that are showing how effective these new designs actually are?
Yeah, there are a number of studies going on right now. And the early results look really good. They suggest that these systems can really cut down on the force that's being transferred to the players. So potentially fewer concussions and other injuries.
That's incredible. It really feels like technology is going to play a major role in making hockey safer. But it's not just about equipment, right? There's also got to be a focus on training and technique.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of progress in those areas. New programs are being developed, new techniques to improve balance, coordination, and body control.
So that players can avoid those awkward falls and collisions that can lead to injuries.
Exactly. It's all about teaching them to navigate those physical demands in a safer, more controlled way. For example, they're learning how to brace themselves for impact, how to fall without getting hurt.
Yeah, and those skills could be useful in all aspects of the game, not just for preventing those injuries.
For sure. Better balance, coordination, and control will lead to better performance overall.
Okay, let's go back to that heads up, don't duck initiative for a minute. We talked about how it teaches players to avoid leading with their heads. Could you tell me a little more about how it actually works?
Sure. So it's not just about telling players to keep their heads up. They have these drills and exercises that teach them how to keep their body in the right position during the game, how to see a hit coming, how to brace for it, and how to take those hits without putting their head and neck at risk.
So it's about building those good habits from a young age.
Exactly. And the studies are showing that it's making a difference. There are fewer cervical spine injuries being recorded.
That's great. Now, on the topic of concussions, there's a lot of research going on to find better ways to diagnose and manage them. What are some of the new things they're coming up with?
One of the most exciting things is the use of sensors and wearable technology. So these sensors can actually track how players are moving and the kinds of impact they're experiencing in real time. So let's say a player gets hit hard. Sensors in their equipment can immediately send an alert to the medical team. So they know exactly how hard the impact was and where it happened.
Wow, that sounds like something out of the future.
It does, but it's happening right now.
That's incredible.
Yeah. These sensors are pretty sophisticated. They can measure things like linear and rotational acceleration, which are the key factors in concussions. And with that information, the medical team can decide right away if that player needs to be checked out.
So you don't have to rely on the players to self-report, which we know can be unreliable sometimes.
Exactly.
Now, this technology can be used for more than just concussions, right?
It can. Yeah. It can be used to look at how players are moving, identify those risky playing habits that might lead to injury.
So coaches could use that information to help their players improve their technique and reduce the risk of getting hurt. That's incredible.
We're not just reacting to injuries, we're trying to stop them from happening in the first place.
It's all really impressive. It seems like there's a real commitment across the board to making hockey safer.
There is.
But what about the culture of hockey itself?
Mhm.
How is that changing? We talked about moving away from that old tough it out attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other changes happening?
Well, there's a lot more focus on the mental and emotional health of players. For a long time, those things were ignored, especially in a sport like hockey where toughness is so important.
So are we seeing a more open approach to mental health issues now? Absolutely.
Yeah.
People are starting to realize that mental health is just as important as physical health.
Mm-hmm.
Players need to feel like they can ask for help if they're struggling.
That's so important,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to concussions. We often focus on the physical effects, but the mental and emotional effects can be just as bad. They really can. Concussions can cause all sorts of problems. Trouble concentrating, memory issues, anxiety, depression. Those things can linger long after the physical symptoms are gone.
So it's really important for everyone involved in the sport, the parents, the coaches, the medical staff, to be aware of that and create a supportive environment where players can talk about these things.
Exactly. We need to get away from that culture of just pushing through it and encourage players to take care of their mental and physical health.
And that's a big change for hockey.
It is.
It's a challenge to change that kind of ingrained mindset, but it seems like we're making progress.
I think so. There's still a long way to go, but things are moving in the right direction.
This has been such a great conversation. We've learned so much about how injuries change at different levels of play, about all the different approaches to prevention, and about how the culture of hockey is evolving.
Yeah, it's been great.
But we're not done yet. We have one more big question to tackle. With all these amazing advancements in safety, how will a game of hockey itself actually change? Can we keep all the speed, the intensity, the physicality that makes hockey so great, while protecting players from those serious long-term injuries?
That's the million-dollar question. It's a question a lot of people are asking.
And we're going to try to answer it in the final part of our deep dive, so stick with us. So welcome back to the deep dive. The question you left us with at the end of part 2, it's really been on my mind. Can hockey really evolve to become safer without losing its soul?
It's the question everyone's asking. Can we keep the speed, the skill, the hitting, while also protecting players from these really bad injuries?
We have seen some pretty big changes, especially with the younger players.
Mm-hmm.
Holding back on the checking, focusing on skills, really changing how we think about head injuries.
Right, and those are big changes. But it's not about taking all the hitting out of hockey. It's about making sure that when there is contact, it's controlled, it's intentional, it's within the rules.
Yeah, it's about making hockey a smarter, safer contact sport, not a non-contact sport.
Exactly. Think about the equipment, too. Helmets are better at protecting players from concussions. And those new boards and glass can make a huge difference in reducing the force of those hits. That's real progress. And it means you can still have physicality, but with less risk.
And then there's the training. Teaching players how to take a hit the right way, how to fall safely, how to check someone legally and safely.
Right, it's a different way of thinking. Players are learning to use their bodies more strategically, not just relying on brute strength. And that can actually make the game more fun to watch.
Yeah, I get it. When players are more in control, they can make those incredible plays, those split-second decisions, without putting anyone at risk.
Exactly. It raises the level of play. And as technology gets better, we're going to see even more ways to help players train smarter and play safer.
You mentioned those sensors that can track impacts.
Yeah.
That seems like it could be huge for preventing concussions. But are there other technologies on the horizon?
Well, one thing I'm really excited about is using virtual reality and augmented reality in training. Imagine players practicing game situations in a virtual world. They could try out different moves, work on their reaction times, and learn how to make those split-second decisions, but without any risk of getting hurt.
That's amazing, like a high-tech hockey simulator.
Exactly. And that kind of training could lead to better performance, fewer injuries.
So it seems like the future of hockey safety is about a lot of different things working together.
Right.
Technology, training, rules, and changing the overall culture of the sport.
And it's about doing more research. We need to keep finding new ways to make hockey safer. And that's going to take everyone working together. Scientists, engineers, doctors, coaches, players, even fans.
It's a team effort.
Mm.
And if we can keep moving forward, I think hockey has a really bright future. We can have a game that's exciting to watch and play, but also safe for the players.
I agree. I'm optimistic. I think hockey is at a crossroads, and the decisions we make now will affect the sport for a long time to come.
It's an exciting time to be a hockey fan. The game's changing, and it's changing for the better.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, this has been an awesome deep dive. Thanks for walking us through all this.
My pleasure.
I think we've all learned a lot about the challenges and the possibilities for making hockey safer.
And I hope you'll keep thinking about these things as you watch and play the game. Remember, making hockey safer isn't about taking away the intensity or the passion. It's about making sure that everyone can enjoy the sport without fear.
Well said. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Science of Hockey. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share it with your friends, teammates, or anyone who loves hockey as much as you do. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment to let us know what you liked, what you'd like to hear next, or any questions you have. Your feedback helps us make the show even better. Until next time, keep your skates sharp, your mind open, and keep chasing the science behind the game.